Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the August 5th, 2022 Land Use Committee meeting where we have red line drafts of some changes to the ADU laws based off of the input that we got and discussed at our last meeting. And our agenda, I think we're going to have Beverly go over an overall.
I'm going to do it together, but yeah.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Rick Tainer, our consultant who's been helping us with the red lines, is also here this morning. So they're going to tag team a little overview of these before we discuss.
So good morning, Land Use Committee. You have before you the draft red lines and also a memo where I've really tried to do a matrix that identifies what we heard from the community, from the abutter surveys and the focus groups, recognizing that we still have some public input that's coming, but certainly this reflects what we presented in the report to the Land Use Committee, the Planning Board, and also the City Council. I've organized the changes by essentially the themes that emerged from the public input summary. I did not talk about essentially creating a process handbook. I think that would be a separate action that's separate from the regulatory changes. And then, of course, the other theme about that the abutters were generally positive about ADUs that I think is also not reflected in the themes in the matrix. So this is just a guide for the public to see how we were listening and how we essentially have translated some of those comments into regulations in the spirit of the goals that were set out for this project, was to remove barriers and with consideration to what we received from public input. So I'd like to just kind of jump right in if there's no questions, but I do want to alert you to 4 questions that we've queued up that we will require some additional guidance for. Are we ready to propose allowing, and it's at the very end of your memo, and additional guidance needed, are we ready to propose allowing detached ADUs administratively if they can meet certain size and performance standards? This is how it is organized now, but I really would like to talk to you about that. Do we want to administratively approve all attached ADUs, even the ones that result in an expansion? This is the attached ADUs, if they can meet all the performance standards. That's a question. These have a lower impact. They impact the primary, the owner of the primary structure to a greater degree than they do to the neighboring properties because they're essentially they're attached. So just to talk about how much we would like to open the gate on that one, I think we've done some opening in the document before you. Does the elimination of bedroom maximum present any problem if we hold a line on size? And we have held a line on size very specifically where it wasn't held before, and that is true for each of the categories of ADUs. We've really been very specific about what the size caps are. And do we need to define subordination for all, accessory structures? And by that, there has been questions raised, and there was at least one case where a accessory structure really was significantly large, while the ADU did meet the standards of the 750 square feet. The structure that housed it was very large. The issue, I think, is that accessory structure was really not subordinate, and it's a question that is somewhat separate, but it has been brought together at least in one case, and certainly is outside the purview of this because we'd be talking about accessory structure subordination, not accessory dwelling unit subordination. But it's just a question we will throw out to the group. And I will let Rick just jump right into the table because these are where a lot of the more significant changes are occurring.
Right. Rick, if you can just make sure you speak into a microphone for everyone else. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Just for clarification, these are proposed for discussion, right? These, I mean, the way you presented, the way you just said it, I'm just thinking of the public. These have not yet been adopted as specific proposals. These are proposed for discussion this morning.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is and the guidance is we're looking for more refinement. This is really the beginning of the refinement process that we will be working with the Land Use Committee, City Council, at the Planning Board. So yes.
Thanks.
Nothing's been adopted.
So thank you again, Rick Tainter. The first page of the table relating to the attached accessory dwelling units is probably the more complex part because we've presented 2 options, and the options are pretty much identical except that One is based solely on the size of the unit, and the other combines the size of the unit with whether or not it involves any expansion to or addition to an existing single-family dwelling. So in each case, the larger type of unit, the one that is more than 750 square feet or more than 750 square feet, or in addition to is a single-family dwelling, those proposed standards, regulations, are the same as the existing. In other words, where an attached dwelling unit, attached accessory dwelling unit requires a conditional use permit, now it would require a conditional use permit under 1.212 in either case. The difference is that if something is up to 750 square feet, which is the break point that is required by state law, where the state law requires the community to allow accessory dwelling units. Those smaller units, whether it's just up to 750 square feet or up to 750 square feet and entirely within a dwelling, those conditional use permits would be changed. I mean, those become permitted rather than conditional use. So again, there's no change in whether something is prohibited in any of the zoning districts. The only question is whether you want to have something be a permitted use for a smaller attached accessory dwelling unit. Is that clear? Are there any questions about that? Okay. Move on? Okay. So then the second piece, we get down to 1.22, which is the detached accessory dwelling unit. And this is where there are some particular changes. So again, we have the same type of breakpoint, a smaller detached accessory dwelling unit and a larger one. And in this case, we're making the distinction not just between the size, but also whether the unit and the lot are non-conforming or whether they're conforming. So if the way we've broken it out is the lower one is if a detached accessory dwelling unit is up to 750 square feet and complies with all the lot and building dimensional standards for the zoning district. In that case, what is being suggested here is changing CU to P, conditional use permit to permitted, for the residential zoning districts with the larger minimum lot area requirements, so rural, SRA, and SRB. And then in addition, allowing by conditional use permit a detached accessory dwelling unit in the GRC district, which is our smallest minimum lot area, our densest residential district. And then in addition, adding, allowing by conditional use permit the detached accessory dwelling unit up to 750 square feet and complying with all dimensional standards in the MRO, CD4L1, and MRB, because those are comparable to some of the residential districts in size in lot area requirements. And then, in addition, allowing a detached accessory dwelling unit in the Gateway 1 and Gateway 2, where currently is not allowed. So that's kind of the more complex part of this change.
Rick, can you talk for
Yeah,
just a second about, so we are proposing some new districts, and we did get some comment this morning about that. And can you talk, in the logic of expanding it to new districts, what, because I know you're very familiar with the code, just to summarize why it makes sense for expansion to these districts, the development pattern that we see in those districts.
Okay. Well, I guess the easiest one to talk about is the MRO, MRB, because those are, I believe, comparable to the GRA, GRB type of dimensional standards. I'm not exactly sure which district they are comparable to, but they're the ones that are not the densest areas. They're the ones where we allow, as they're called, mixed residential office, mixed residential business. And so if you're mixing residential and non-residential uses, and you have a single-family home, this would give you the option of mixing two residential uses rather than mixing one residential use and one non-residential use. I guess that's what I'm thinking there. The G1 and G2, I'm going to leave the toughest one for last. The G1 and G2, Gateway 1, Gateway 2, we had a lot of discussion over. This is really, these are areas, when we look back at the top of the use table, residential use is single-family dwelling, these are areas where a single-family residential dwelling is allowed as of right. So it seemed, given that, I mean, if we were going to restrict single-family residences in those districts, it makes sense not to allow detached accessory dwelling unit for them. But if we're promoting single residences in those districts, then it seemed to make sense to, because they are more intense districts in some senses than a pure residential district, it seemed to make sense to allow smaller detached accessory dwelling units by right. And note that we're not proposing any larger accessory dwelling units in these districts, only the smaller ones. So I guess the tougher one would be the GRC district. So the GRC district, currently, we do not permit a detached accessory dwelling unit of any size. And it seemed that, you know, we talked about all the different types of conditions or situations that a particular lot in a GRC district might entail. And in this case, if a lot complied with all lot and dimensional standards and the detached dwelling unit were less than 750 square feet, or up to 750 square feet, it seemed to make sense to allow that to fit in there, particularly when we already allow a garden cottage in those districts. So we allow a garden cottage by conditional use permit where the detached dwelling unit does not comply with the requirements for in terms of setbacks and so forth. So, which is a smaller one, we allow it up to 600 feet. So it seemed to make sense. It was a small change, and you know, this is something that is clearly a judgment call, but it seemed to make sense to, if we allow a 600 square foot garden cottage that violates setbacks in essence by conditional use permit, it would seem to make sense to allow a 750 square foot attached dwelling unit that respects setbacks. It's you know, it's an issue of density and neighborhood character and all those types of things, and it certainly could go either way. But this was just our proposal in that regard. Did that cover it? Okay, great. Yeah. And then going to the larger ones. So this I understand is an area that has been problematic in some sense, where variances have been granted and so forth. And so the suggestion is to, and to keep track of my things here, to allow basically to keep the same standards for the larger detached accessory dwelling units in the residential districts, and actually being, the ones that are CU now would continue to be CU, the ones that are there N now would continue to be N, and across the board. So the only change, there would be no changes made to the larger ones or the ones that require any type of variance or non-conforming in any way. I hope that is...
I think that's good.
Okay.
I think we kind of understand, just based on what we've heard and what, you know, the types of comments that have, or the problems that we've seen over a period of time, that it really is the detached ADUs that tend to venture into areas that are more impactful to surrounding property owners. And so keeping that with especially the larger units, that keeping that really tied to the conditional use permit seems to be the right thing to do. So we did open it up for the smaller units that are less than 750 that meet the performance standards, but and that's a question for you to think about as we work through all and we'll get to that at the end, but but we've kept it the same for the detached units that are more than 750 square feet. You'll see later that we actually have a total cap on how big they can be, and we have made that not subject to modification. We've been very clear. It's been an area of confusion about what can be modified and what can't be modified. We've clarified that in this proposal.
I have a question. I think it might tie into the 4 questions you have at the end. You have, basically, we've got 3 options. We've got not permitted, permitted, and conditional use permit. Under the permitted, would you view that as being an administrative approval by staff?
So right now it's queued up, and we have a clarification that the planning director, and usually it would be something that I probably would refer to different staff members to, there was this other thought, and we'd like to talk to legal about it. That's how it is right now, that the subject to planning board approval, and it wouldn't be, I think, unlike planning director approval, sorry. But there is this idea too that if it is allowed by right, all the building permits go through the planning department, through our development compliance coordinator, through Vincent Hayes. They all go through Vincent, and when questions arise that he has to check for verification on certain things, that because there is criteria, he would typically refer to Nick or sometimes to me, depending on what the question is. So to a certain degree, it would never go straight to building permit without someone looking at these performance standards, but we're just trying to make sure that we have a good flag in there for that. So that's how we've captured it by saying that administrative approval will be by the planning director, but we want to talk to legal about the best mechanism to make sure that when it comes in for a building permit, that there is still some review that they've met the performance standards, because we do have some subordination standards that I think are pretty clear now, and some architectural standards that may still need some refinement, but I think someone needs to put a set of eyes on those. And I'm not saying the building department can't do it, but it's really not the area that they typically work in.
Okay, and when I use the term performance standards, I usually mean more than dimensional requirements, but you're using them to mean specifically dimensional requirements here.
No, I'm also using it to mean the subordination and also the architectural standards. Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about architectural standards
Yes.
later, okay. Just quickly, and I won't take too much time, you were jumping on the detached from not permitted to permitted, as opposed to jumping to conditional use permit for up to 750 square feet. I'm just wondering, because on an attached unit, those changes make sense to me, but I'm wondering if instead of going from not permitted to permitted, there should be a conditional use permit, perhaps in the gateway district. But I'm just talking here, not specifically making a proposal, but it seems like a bigger leap than we might want to make, especially what you just said, where the detached ones are more problematic. Mm-hmm. So do we want to go all the way to permitted, or do we want to have...
Yeah, it's a question before this committee, so I definitely would like to hear your feedback on that. Mm-hmm. I think it's a question we're raising as well.
I think it's one of the things that once we're done looking at everything, we should put it forward as a question. And I agree, we go back and forth. Those are some of the things that I think this committee really needs to sort of iron out. And I believe we had them as not permitted before, because when those districts came in, no one really, I think, realized that they had single-family allowable. And I think that's why it originally wasn't in there as a conditional use permit. So, and no one, no one just caught it. We're thinking, oh, these are gateway districts. Really, you allow single-family? I'm like, well, yeah, we allow single-family. So it was one of the things I had brought up early on. So whether it's permitted or conditional use, I think we have to have a discussion about that and then make a decision what we send forward for further review.
And related to that, the conditions for the conditional use permits can vary. They could be much simpler in the Gateway District, for example, than in some of the other residential districts. They don't have to be the same standards. So just
Right.
food for thought.
We could change that. Yep. No.
And actually, one of the things that I brought up in our meetings was, shouldn't we change the P to an N for single-family uses? And it's way outside the scope of what we're talking here, but, that was one of the questions is having single-family dwellings allowed as a right in the G1 district as appropriate as it should be? And I guess the question came up about whether you wanted to have PUDs there, for example. So
Yeah, I think it's a bigger question. And I mean, some of this does have crossover as, the subordination of accessory structures. I mean, definitely there's a crossover there if you happen to have an ADU in that structure. So there's a few things that have crossover. They're just kind of on the periphery of the scope, so we'll look for guidance from you about that. But I don't think we want to tackle that particular one, but definitely.
That was the other one, was
Yeah.
should we be looking at
Yep.
defining what an accessory structure is in terms of its subordination to the principal?
We do say in the code that ADUs accessory dwelling are not accessory structures in our definition, but I think there's been, obviously they get conflated in certain circumstances, so, all right.
Okay, moving on. So the third category is garden cottage, and if you recall, this was something that we established as a way to kind of reflect more unique circumstances in Portsmouth than could be covered by the state's regulations regarding attached and detached accessory dwelling units. So these are, garden cottages are essentially conversion of an existing accessory building, and the accessory building could be well within the side yard setbacks, for example, of that would pertain to the principal use. And so in this case, we made a distinction. The originally, and this is kind of a question of interpretation, because I think the question is, how much expansion of an existing accessory building would be permitted and still to be a garden cottage? And so here we're making the distinction between an accessory building that is where there's no outward expansion at all. So you've got a garage, you create your garden cottage entirely within your dwelling unit, entirely within that garage, and so that we're proposing to change the CU to a permitted use. The different case is if you've got a shed and you want to add on to it and turn it into a dwelling unit, so you obviously have to expand it. So that would require a conditional use permit, as it currently does, but not more than 600 square feet. So there's the ordinance, there are several places in these proposed changes where the distinction is made, saying that if it's over 600 square feet, for whatever reason, it is no longer a garden cottage. It is a detached accessory dwelling unit.
And that is a big change. So we've had a lot of garden cottages, because I think every time anybody had an existing structure, they would just request modification of the size. And I am on record saying, it's still within the 600 feet contemplated, even though the regulations say it can only be for the entry or for the deck. I've said, well, it's still within the 600 feet, so we're thinking it's, generally can be considered. We actually put an end to that conversation in the ordinance, and we say it can go to 600 square feet. It cannot get any bigger than that, or it's going to be kicked into a detached ADU. So that is a big change, and it's been a subject of a little confusion, but it does start to make a distinction about those bigger units. So
really, there are two substantive changes that are under the garden cottage thing. One is that 600 square foot cap, and the other is that if nothing happens to the volume of the building, that it would become permitted. So if you have a second floor of a garage, for example, and you're just sticking a dwelling unit in it, and there's no change there's no outward expansion at all, then that is a kind of de minimis change to the structure, and we're proposing that be as a permitted use, again, with administrative approval from the planning director. And down at the bottom of the table, you see those two references. I don't have in the table here the final column of the use regulations, but that's where we have cross-references to the different sections of the ordinance. And so these are essentially footnotes to the table, directing you to that part of the table.
So an existing accessory building of 800 square feet could be converted as a matter of right?
800 square feet? No.
It doesn't say that here, but...
It does say elsewhere in the ordinance.
The threshold is still 600.
Yeah, elsewhere in the ordinance it says if it's more than 600, it's a DADU, not a garden cottage.
Okay.
And so therefore, if your accessory building of 800 square feet were within the setbacks that are required by zoning, then it's, then it would require variance, essentially. Yeah.
that would be triggered on two levels, because it's more than 750 square feet, and it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Corey, did you have a question?
That was pretty much kind of it, just making sure that. And just for a little clarification, what are the benefits of having it be a garden cottage versus just having everything as a detached ADU?
The benefit that we saw when we created that special category was that we thought about many places in Portsmouth where there are garages that might be convertible to a dwelling unit. And we didn't want to, so the accessory, we're trying to make the distinction between, in terms of the impact on the abutting neighbor, basically. So we wanted to be able to allow a very small, creation of a very small unit in an existing structure that wasn't expanded.
Which may be in the setbacks.
It could be in the setback,
Yeah.
yes. As opposed to a detached, so the city does not have to allow detached accessory dwelling units. The only thing the city has to do by state law is to allow attached accessory dwelling units. And so we were trying to figure out how we could allow it detached that would be of minimal impact to the surrounding neighbors. And so one thing is to say, okay, you can have detached as long as they meet all the requirements for a single-family dwelling. And you can have garden cottages as long as they're very small and don't involve any change to the structure.
Yep. Okay.
All right, I think that is the table. There's still some questions hanging out there. Did you have anything else to add?
No,
To the table?
take it away.
Okay, I'll jump into the standards and try and go through this kind of quickly so that we can get to the discussion. And maybe I should organize this by section rather than by theme and put the theme on the side. I've thought about that because then you can follow along this table, but I'll try and get through these quickly, and you can look also into the table and see the sort of summary and purpose for the change.
Okay, just interrupt for a second. There are several pages in here that we included that involve no change at all, but they're really just important for cross-references. So we've got the references, the dimensional intensity standards, and the section introducing accessory buildings. There's nothing there that's changing. It's just if you want to look back and see how this relates to the changes we're proposing.
Yep, thank you. Jumping into section 10.814, accessory dwelling units. The first standard that we see some changes, 10.814.21. One of the directions we had from this group, you may recall, is that we tackle non-conforming issues. So this, I'm sorry, that's the next section. This section actually is essentially offering some clarification about the minimum lot size. So we require that both the principal dwelling unit and the accessory dwelling unit meet the minimum lot size of the zoning district. This actually says that notwithstanding the above reference, the combination of the two does not need to comply with the minimum lot area per dwelling unit of the zoning district, but must comply with the minimum lot area for the district. Essentially, we're trying to offer clarification that these two units are treated as a single dwelling unit rather than two. We know that that has come up as problematic with requiring a double-sized lot to add a accessory dwelling unit. So this actually says they're going to be treated as you still have to mind all the dimensional requirements for the district as it relates to setbacks and minimum yards and open space and parking, building coverage, but the lot area, we're going to look at these two as as a single unit. And I hope that is a clarification. I went through a few iterations because depending on which staff member was looking at it, they're like, wait, I don't understand it. It seems to seem that you're throwing out all the lot standards. And I said, so we tried to offer clarification. Still needs to meet the minimum lot area for a dwelling unit, but we're not going to make you do it for two dwelling units.
And just again, to be clear about this, the original language is copied from state law. So any municipal regulation applicable to single-family dwellings shall also apply to combination, da-da-da-da. And I think many places don't have our particular regulation of a minimum lot area per dwelling unit. And so that was why it really didn't seem to meet the intent of the state law, even though it seemed to go beyond what we needed to do by state law. So it seemed to be important to, as you said, to clarify and to adjust that. And also, if you think about it, in say the GRA, GRB, GRC districts, they already allow two-family uses with double the lot area. So there'd be no incentive to do an accessory dwelling unit instead of a full-size dwelling unit. So I think that this really addresses those that are not large enough to be two full-size units, but it would allow an accessory dwelling unit on those lots.
Thank you.
So based on the way I read the next paragraph, if your entire ADU is within your principal structure, you don't have to meet the minimum lot area for the district. Is that correct? Or, in other words, if you're not expanding,
Paragraph 2.2,
yeah, if you're not expanding the footprint or
if you're
anything.
non-conforming, correct.
Yeah, okay, so you do, at that point, you still don't, you don't have to meet the minimum lot area
Right,
requirement?
right,
Okay.
yeah.
If it's completely contained within the, if it's attached, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because, I mean, I know before we discussed, just minimum lot areas in general in districts, basically, there's a lot of lots that don't conform as they
Right.
currently are, but I just wanted, okay.
We also offered some clarification about what can be expanded on this. So this is a important, I think, a distinction, is that we are allowing that to be expanded as long as the nonconformity is not expanded. So if you're in the setback, you cannot go further into the setback. Doesn't mean you can't expand the footprint ever. You cannot expand the nonconformity. And you cannot create a new nonconformity. Obviously, you can never create a new nonconformity without a variance. So, but we thought to clarify that. So it's important, it's an important one. We're saying if it's a nonconforming structure, you can expand it. You just can't expand the nonconforming component of it.
But does that then kick it into kind of at that point, do you have to meet the minimum lot area for the district?
If you're not, again, this only applies to an existing non-conforming situation.
Yeah.
So right, so correct. If you have an existing single-family home on a non-conforming lot,
Right.
and you have, say, you're probably violating the front setback too, you could probably put an addition on the back of it, and do that, but that's the only, and that doesn't prohibit you from doing that expansion. You just can't create you can't move into a side yard where you haven't moved into before.
Correct.
that kind
But
of-
you can, like you said, you can go backwards.
Right.
And even though it's a non-conforming lot because of the
Non-conforming
lot
lot, right. But
dimension.
you're not changing the
But
nonconformity.
that is a good point that you bring up. That's a good distinction.
I think
Because
that's-
the lot is you are violating the lot size and you are expanding, and you're making that somehow, you're exacerbating that nonconformity to a certain degree. I understand what you're saying. I don't
Yeah.
know that we interpret it that way.
Well, I think that compared to a single-family home, so with a single-family home, you could do that very thing, correct? You could, as long, you could add a porch in your home on a non-conforming lot, as long as you're not creating a new nonconformity.
Right. I just want to make
Yeah,
sure,
right.
they're not being dinged for having a small lot
Correct.
to begin with, and as long as they're not going into the setbacks.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
I think what I'm hearing, what Corey's saying, the idea is that lot size shouldn't be a punishment against accessory dwelling units on any lot, provided you're not creating a new violation of the zoning ordinance in terms of dimensional requirements.
Yes.
And I think if that's sort of the overriding strategic thought, I think there's a simpler way to combine those two paragraphs, but I don't want to get into wordsmithing today. That's a little bit nutty. But I'd be happy to send some suggestions.
Well, I think that, I understand the question you raised, because there is, I think it's important distinction to make that, minimum lot size is a dimensional standard, and when you're sort of exacerbating it when you are essentially expanding the structure. I think that we can probably offer some clarification on this.
The only reason I bring it up is because there's so many lots
Yes,
that are non-conforming.
And I think, to your point, if the intent is to not penalize them for that, we can take a look at how we can get that cleaned up a little bit.
Well, if this group can agree that's the goal,
Is that,
then
I think, and maybe that's just a
we
question.
we can wrap.
That was our goal.
That's the if. That's
That is
the
the
if,
goal.
yeah.
So we'll see if we can add some nuance there that really clarifies that, because I think that is a little bit, I think we were thinking about setback violations and
Everything
things.
about lot area.
Maybe, yeah, we were. All right, moving along, I think the next change is 10.814.40. Here, we see two things. We've eliminated the bedroom, and this is one of the questions we've asked you. We've said shall not have more than 2 bedrooms, but we have provided a hard cap. In no case shall an attached ADU be more than 1,000 square feet gross floor area. So this is something that sometimes has been subject to modification, could be a modification request, and we're really putting a very hard limit on what an ADU is going to be for the city of Portsmouth, capping it at 1,000 square feet. And then eliminating the bedroom count. And we talked about this, and I think we asked each other, are we losing anything by eliminating that bedroom count? I think the response was, you know, it's really the size that we're really kind of concerned about. If they can make that work, then let them make that work, but it has to basically meet the size requirements and meet the standard for a dwelling unit, which still includes, you know, obviously bedrooms, bathrooms, and all the other standardized things that have to be part of that.
And keeping in mind, if they're on septic systems, that's going to limit their bedroom count as well.
'Cause that's
they
what
have to-
triggers-
That will trigger them to have to meet, the septic has to meet that size too,
So to
so.
build a new septic system.
Right.
So, bedrooms are gonna be limited in other ways, especially if they're not on water and sewer, or if they're not in sewer, then they will be limited that way. So we're like, you know, if you can fit it in the whole size, it's still smaller, and you want 2 tiny bedrooms, then why should we not allow them to have an extra bedroom?
Or, yeah.
I like the cap.
Where did the 1,000 come from? And it's a nice round number, but did it,
I don't know, I think we just
I
thought it
don't-
was, yeah. We just,
Right?
yeah.
WAG?
It's just, yeah, exactly.
Yep. The next item is 10.814.43. If there are 2 or more doors in the front of the principal dwelling unit, one door shall be designed as the principal entrance, the other door shall be designed as appear to be secondary. We felt like this standard kind of hit at what we're trying to, and this is really the beginning of what we have really consolidated into what we termed as our subordination section. We've really brought all the standards that really touch on what makes it subordinate, and really kept the ones that we fully understand, that we could sit down as maybe a brand-new first-year planner and say, I understand what that means. You know, and so I was supposed to bring some pictures for that. I actually have a bunch in my neighborhood that actually, I don't know if they already use, but they actually have a second door that is very much subordinate. And I will try and get those pictures for future discussion. But essentially, this is just a standard that we thought was very clear and easy to understand. And instead of saying maintain the appearance of single family, start to get into real things that help us to distinguish what that subordination actually means. And that's true for the next couple standards as well. We just offered some clarification. And 10.814.432, it applies that 40% rule, and we clarify where that 40% rule, that essentially that an exterior wall of an attached ADU that faces the street shall comprise no more than 40%, so it clearly has to be subordinate, and we define what facade means in this so that we can be very clear about where this applies. If you, for example, have a corner lot, we don't want that attached ADU to dominate that building. 10.814.43, an addition to or an expansion of an existing building for the purpose of creating an attached accessory dwelling, it shall be recessed at least 18 inches from the front wall. Where addition includes the principal dwelling unit, where the addition includes construction of attached garage, it shall be set back 10 feet from the front wall of the principal dwelling unit. It's to create that clear articulation and subordination of that accessory dwelling. Now, this would be for a new or an expansion. This would be for that.
Question?
Yes.
on the 40% on the facade, do you mean the area of the facade, or do you mean the width of on the street, say? I'm just trying to think of how to interpret this for Vincent.
It would be the width,
Width.
was the intention, because there are height
Yeah.
standards that
We should add that word then.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And just real quick on the next paragraph, so was it just an architectural kind of review for the 10 feet versus 18 inches, just because it's such a big difference?
Yeah, the idea with the 18 inches is there isn't a garage underneath the ADU.
Right.
And if there's a garage, you're gonna, 10 to me would be the minimum you would want to set the structure back, because the cars are typically parked in front of the garage doors.
True.
Then they'd be in
Yeah.
front of the house.
Right.
Ideally, it's 18 feet back, but
Yep.
it gets difficult when the house is only 26 feet deep to connect them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's kind of the minimum to
Okay.
at least not have the cars be dominant when you go by the structure with this new garage. The 18 inches is, again, a subtle subordination of the addition to the house to create a break in the facade. There's typically a 32 to 38-foot facade.
But when you're building a single-family dwelling and you're building a garage, do you
Yes.
have to set that back currently?
If it's attached, no.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you don't need to do.
Right, that's what
Yeah.
I figured, so that's why I was just curious on the. I
But
mean,
you should.
Yeah,
should,
exactly.
yeah, right.
So we got two hands on the wheel here, that's why we're
Right,
doing it.
right.
Yeah.
I do
Okay.
think we had one come in we've had two come in recently.
You can put the garage in front of the house.
I do think, and I wish that I had the two images before me, we did have two new construction attached ADUs that have come in recently. And I don't know that either one of them was quite that far back. I know that they probably met the 18, but I think at least one of them had a garage, but I'd have to check. So this might be something for further discussion.
Definitely had a couple.
We've had a
Well,
couple.
my-
We're seeing some new ones. It's something that I've seen too since I've been here.
Right. I guess that my only thought being, by doing that, you're running,
Jogging.
you're jogging, and so the building footprint is going to look larger in the end.
Mm-mm.
But
It'll look smaller, because it's not a continuous plane if you don't have that step back.
I'm just thinking from the abutters on the sides, that's all. Because it's
Maybe
gonna
if
look
you're
a
right
lot
beside the
longer.
building, yeah.
I actually live in a house that's just like this. The garage does step back that far. And the 10 feet then allows you on that partial wall to actually have a window, because we do have a
True.
small window
Yep.
there.
Yeah.
So it allows the light into the house. So, yeah, but
Breaks
in the
up the
back, it
massing.
jogs back too, right? So there's a jog on both sides, but it does make it look a little bit, I think, small.
I think it's also important to recognize people with single-family homes that do attached garages don't often put rooms above them. So there is a subordination factor, even if they decide to hold the plane, because as of right, they're not doing an ADU. They don't often make something the same size as their house stuck to the side of their house, which an ADU starts to move in that direction.
But this, once again, probably only apply in new construction. So, for instance, what if someone
Well,
builds a new house, doesn't finish the upstairs of their garage?
Yes.
3 years later, they decide they want to finish it off.
Right.
At
Well-
that point in time,
This wouldn't apply at that point.
No, it wouldn't apply to that. Well, that's unusual. We've got at least 3 or 4 cases in the last 5 years of people adding a 2-level garage ADU next to a single-story ranch, which is this whole subordination
right,
issue.
right.
There's a reason to set those back. I was kidding, but I wasn't kidding about having the garage set back a little bit, because you really want the streetscape to be more pedestrian-friendly and bicycle-friendly. And if it's fronted by garage doors and cars parked right in front of those garages, it feels like a place where the cars live and not where the people live. So that's
That's
the
the idea.
reason
Well,
for it.
that's fine, I'm
No,
just,
no, good questions.
It's a big point. It's a big point.
Okay. 10.814434, I think, is just a clarification. I think that,
There are many places throughout here where we've tried to use consistent language, so where we said principal building, change to principal dwelling unit, where we said dwelling, change to principal dwelling unit, we're just trying to use the same language throughout, so there's no suggestion that we mean something different when we use a different word.
right.
Rick, pull that microphone a little.
Sorry?
And this would tie into the new definition of building height, assuming we get that.
So,
And this is just another, another existing 10.814434 is just another additional item that defines subordination before we move into the next section, which is really addresses architectural consistency. And this is another performance standard. We've tried to add some nuance here. Use of same or so this is when we are defining that they must be architecturally consistent. We are saying that must happen through use of same or similar materials, including siding type, siding color, and masonry construction material. Use of same or similar window openings and styling. Recessed windows or multiple panes that are present on the primary structure should be utilized on the AADU with the same or similar spacing. Use of similar door openings and door types, similarly proportioned, and use of similar architectural features to include shape and pitch of roof eaves and trim details. So this is how we've sort of, I think that even a new planner could look at that and say, I understand what that means, and and it would help. I think it would help me too when I was looking at the. We've had one recently where those of you on planning will remember, where the primary building is now becoming the DADU and the new principal building, trying to figure out what things are important for those to look the same as and maybe the changes that have to occur. This would have been really helpful to me. Mm-hmm. Yep. I would have looked for those things and said, okay, it's got to do these things. So this is where we are, and we can certainly open that up a little bit more if we'd like to. Moving along to detached accessory dwelling units. 10.814.51, the DADU shall not be larger than 700 gross floor area except as permitted through a CUP. So tying back to the original table, in no case shall it be larger than 1,000 square feet gross floor area. So then again, we have capped what we will allow, consider a ADU. 10 point, go
I'd
ahead.
just say that first one, that first paragraph they were crossing out entirely.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Goes
missed that,
back to
yeah.
that change in minimum lot area per
Thank you.
dwelling unit.
Thank you,
which
Rick.
It's just no longer necessary.
That actually is a really important one. I'm sorry, I skipped over that. That deletion is really pretty significant because it really is reinforcing that double lot requirement within the GRA district. So 10.814.52, the DADU shall be subordinate. So here we are again working, moving into subordination standards for detached ADUs, providing some clarification there, putting all the standards in one section, creating some parallel construction in the regulatory language by having that same section reflected in the DADU section. The wall of DADU shall be set back at least 10 feet further from the front line than the existing front wall of the single-family dwelling. That actually, I believe, is just a moved standard, relocated
Yes, right.
standard.
It is.
That was at somewhere else, but now is
It
clearly.
was on the next page. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
see it crossed out on the next page.
So we've kept that standard. And then again, the 40% rule, and then redefining the facade. Noted your comment about width, Rick, on that. 10.814.523, building height, footprint, and volume of the DADU shall be no greater than 75% of the building height, footprint, and volume of the principal dwelling unit. So here we do get into a little bit more of scaling and proportionality to make sure that we don't end up with a freestanding DADU that is essentially eclipses the principal structure. It is a new standard. It does that 75%. I don't know if we got that exactly right, but it certainly, if you have a smaller dwelling unit or if you have a very large unit, you could see how this proportionality works in concert with the cap to create a proportionally sized unit to the principal unit. So I think it also gets at the idea that you could potentially do, something that could be like a duplex of some kind, having two units that are the same size. If they're both 1,000 square feet, then they could create a different kind of development pattern that I'm not sure we're trying to open up with these regulations.
So what about like building height, footprint, and volume? So I guess my question on the building height, no greater than 75%. So if you have a one-story ranch and you're building, you can't.
It'd be really.
Well, that's why it wouldn't meet
Better
the-
have
it wouldn't meet the-
cathedral ceilings.
Yeah, it wouldn't meet the code requirements for ceiling height and everything else, I would imagine. So,
It would have to be a small it would have to be 75% of whatever that structure is. It's subordinate, it would be
We need
clearly.
to model that,
Yeah. It
that
would-
number.
Yeah.
To get to that.
right,
Because there needs to be a remedy for the ranch.
right.
And at the same time, we don't want 3,000 square foot
Right.
DADUs.
Right, nor would you want, 2.5-story
Right.
right next to the ranch. Yeah, so I understand, I'm just,
I
the
think the
75%.
intention here, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is that this isn't the DADU, it's the structure in which it's housed.
Correct.
That's important. 75% isn't just what's inside. If you build a two-car garage or a carriage house and put the ADU in it,
Right.
I thought the intention here was that we'd be no higher as a placeholder than 75% of the volume, height, or footprint of the principal structure. Again, to meet the subordination, because you wouldn't want to see 3,000 square feet strapped onto the ADU, and now you have a.
right. I'm just thinking,
3,750
the
square
principal
feet.
structure is 12 feet tall.
Right, no, I got the ranch part. We'll look at the ranch.
You could say something like no taller than 75% of the building height or 20 feet, whichever is larger.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I think
there-
I just got what you're saying essentially, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a solution to the ranch problem. I
Okay.
also think we need to be clear, it's the
Okay.
aggregate gross floor area, not just the ADU inside something that could be
I don't think
large.
I don't think we have clarified that, and that kind of tips into, the problem, I think, with using this as a silver bullet for that, is that if essentially somebody could come in and build that big accessory structure, because we don't have a limitation on the structures, and then potentially add a DADU later to it. So it can be something that can be, now then it could be, converted. So it's a little bit problematic, because the real issue is how big should an accessory structure be relative to and that is problematic. That's been, yeah.
That was the goal of this, even if it's the wrong, I mean, otherwise it's nonsensical, because if you have a larger structure, how would you ever interpret this 75% thing? So I think the intention, even if it's not the way we want to finish it up, and I don't mean the number or the ranch problem, but I think that's the idea of subordination of the accessory structure versus just the ADU inside it.
I think we really need to take on the accessory structure issue. I know it's sort of outside our scope, but it really leads into this, because a person could build a 4-car garage, and that's going to be much bigger than the ranch house, and then try to
Right.
put a detached ADU on it. And I just think that they go so hand in hand that I think dealing with that now would be better.
I think the thing to do, then, in this one, is be more clear about that.
Yeah.
To say
Gross floor area.
the
structure.
detached and including the structure for which
Right.
it, and all other areas within the structure that, cannot meet, exceed this requirement.
Gross floor area typically means the entire building.
Yeah.
And this came up with an application that we don't have to talk about specific ones, but.
Outside of walls?
Yeah,
It's the outside walls, not just
it's
the
defined that way.
accessory portion, accessory dwelling unit inside it. So I think that needs to be clarified. And then, if I buy that ranch and I want to put a 2-story colonial on it, and then put my detached or attached, that's a whole separate application, that's fine. It seems to me it could be fine if the things are met. So I think maybe back to having a tiered approach to different circumstances of you've got an existing condition where it's a 19th century structure that are usually not ranch burgers. They're taller because that's what they did back then, and that's a lot of Portsmouth. Not an issue, but if it's shorter, how does that address? Should that be a little bit different set of performance criteria? Are they proposing to change it? But also, especially the definitions. I don't know, did you get into gross floor area or?
It's written the way you said it.
Yeah.
See, it's standard
Yeah.
language.
It's already
So I
there.
think you reread it, do you
No,
have a-
I brought it up in a meeting and
Yeah, I'm not sure, yeah.
So I think, for clarification on this one, I think really making that distinction for a ranch, because I think that would be, I don't think, that was
Single-story
unintended.
structure.
I don't think we meant to try and make it a little short building. So I think that's one we need to clarify. And then the other thing I think is that if we do mean to say the entire structure, without having to get into wordsmithing about terms, just say that. Just be very clear, so that when somebody looks at that, if they're building a new structure, the DADU portion of that is combined with the entire structure and has to meet the subordination requirement. If we mean to say that, let's just say that.
So isn't the bigger picture for those who don't understand dimensional things, if you have an attached one, it's supposed to be a little bit back and a little bit, subordinate to the main structure. If they're detached, same thing. It's going to not dominate the lot. It's going to be something that is,
But if it's part of
the child, it's the child of the main house, which is the parent.
That's true for the DADU, but it's not true for accessory structures, and that, because we don't have that.
Which is why we're having this
So when it's
conversation.
folded together, we really need to say, when it's folded together, this is going to apply, this standard applies when they're folded together. We can't fix that other thing. You still put a 4-car garage with,
Right.
and that's not going to be,
Yeah, I
we're
think
not
That's how you
tackling
game
that.
it. That's how you
Well,
game
I think
it.
we need to think about a segmentation clause, because you could put the garage in front of the house and then come back and ask for an ADU, and I think that's not the intention of what we're trying to do here. So it would be good for us to think about how
Or make the garages
we
big.
can prevent somebody.
You can't do that the way we've written it.
I understand that.
Because-
So I'm just putting it down there for something we might want to think about.
Does this
before
prevent
is
somebody,
done.
from putting a 4-car garage in, and then a
Exactly.
year later coming in, and that's just the
Exactly.
question,
There's gotta be
coming
a
in
way to-
saying, well, it's there now,
You
so.
can build an 8,000 square foot accessory
Right,
structure.
But if we say what Rick was saying about just, looking at the entire structure, say that define the entire structure.
I think that's the way to do it, to
Yes, yeah.
say, where an ADU is enclosed in a larger structure, this standard shall apply.
So you almost change the language of 523 saying the building height, footprint, and volume of the entire structure containing the DADU shall be no
That's
greater
it,
than.
that's the.
That's-
So they
that's
need
the
a variance to take something larger later if they segment it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
So
the-
how do we deal with someone putting the garage in front of a single-story structure?
That still captures it.
How does that capture it if it's not the 75% part? Just the placement of the building.
I think
Any of
we've
these-
identified the problem. I'd suggest we
Well,
move on.
Yeah, let's get on it. Okay, that's a good problem. All right, we'll keep moving. But we do think that's an important sort of, and I'm glad we're spending some time with it, because that is an important component of subordination, and I think that we all agree that that's one of the intents.
And just to go back to what we had in the table, this issue about requiring any variance, I guess it doesn't require variance to construct. Yeah, it would require variance at that point.
It
So
would,
then require-
it would, because it doesn't meet the
Yeah,
standard.
right,
It doesn't meet the standard.
Okay.
So
All
not
right.
to throw another,
Oh, go ahead. These are
real quick, just, I don't know, maybe it's captured somewhere else in the ordinance, but corner lots and through lots. So if you, because we're talking about the 40% front, the facade and principal front yard and all that. If you have a corner lot, and I think of the one that came before us with Dodges, that, basically, how does that then get addressed? I just want to make sure that we're still,
You only use the principal front yard, which is the address assigned to the lot.
Okay.
Defines that, so we don't, presumably that's the front door of the
So
house.
as long as they meet the setbacks on the side yard, or for that ADU, and say they get a driveway permit to come in off that side yard, I'm just trying to, think of,
That's a good way, you gotta test it. You gotta test it. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, no, I think we need to sketch these options and see.
Yep.
You know, if there were students available, I'd give it to students and say, how can you game this? See what they come up with.
Well, I think that,
Corey's doing a good job.
just looking for loopholes, that's all.
thank
Yeah,
you.
that's a good, no, you have, that's a good
Thank you,
thing.
Corey. That's a good point. Thank you. Moving forward, we have, again, the architectural standards, as we talked about before, really bringing those into this same section, creating that parallel construction in the detached ADU section as well. This is a change. The DADU shall be separated from the principal dwelling unit. Again, that same language, that consistent language, by at least, it said 20 feet. We thought 10 feet to bring it closer. Rather than push it out towards the abutting property, we weren't sure why that standard would be, so bring it a little closer to the principal dwelling unit, and essentially, hopefully, through that, minimize some of the impacts to the abutting property. Trying to get those impacts as close to the principal dwelling unit where the owner lives, so that they can manage it as well.
And I think the key two words in that sentence are "at least." It's not saying shall be 10, it's at least 10. So
Right.
if you've got a wide lot, you can continue to put it where you want it. So it's also as much about allowing people in Portsmouth to be able to do ADUs where they might not have a wide lot, and that 20-foot separation requirement requires a variance to address on a narrow lot.
I'm just wondering, why do you even have to have this separation? I mean,
Well, you're gonna need 5 feet in the building code
Yeah,
anyway.
right.
So.
right, so,
Well, it's pretty tight to have an accessory dwelling unit 5 feet off your house, architecturally.
Oh.
Can be done, but
yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, the constructability gets real difficult. I'm just wondering,
Are you saying as long as it meets fire code separation, that that's your issue, make it work?
Yeah, because if you're at, 8 feet, you have to, I guess, if you're within 8 feet or something like that, do you then just put a little, I mean, it doesn't
Breezeway.
even have to be a real breezeway, just a
Make it
facade,
attached.
and then it's,
There's the separation like this, and then there's corner-to-corner distance, which is, corner-to-corner at 5 feet even isn't as much of a problem necessarily, especially depending what you're doing, as opposed to this, so,
But if they can make it work,
I don't know.
it's not a magical number. But 5 feet seems
tight.
tight
yeah.
architecturally. Just
I
aesthetically.
guess that was my
Yeah.
question. Is it more of an architectural thing than anything else at that point? Because,
Should that be something that you give the applicant the opportunity to show something different under a different set of criteria? Maybe that triggers a conditional use permit, if you want to propose less.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, let's think
looked-
about it.
I will, yeah.
File it down here, yeah.
Would the, at
free
this-
thinking
for the,
time.
for the purposes of moving forward, would you like to see this move to 5 feet,
Do we need
or
it
would
at
you,
all?
or would you?
Yeah, well, then
or-
you wouldn't need it at all.
Wouldn't need it at all.
Do we need it at all?
The building code would take care.
Should we just eliminate this and see if they can make it work architecturally?
yeah, because it has to be subordinate still, so.
It has to meet the subordination standards, it has to be, all those things have to be in place. The building code will essentially, but for my part, I always like, if it is in the building code, I'd like to, at least state that, because then as they start to go through it, they'll start with the zoning before they get to the building code. We know that it's in there for fire code separations, but,
It just always surprises me in Portsmouth, the lots are so weird that, the way people get things to work is always so interesting, so,
and we could just say, just needs to meet building code standards.
I think that's.
Okay, so we'll say.
I think meeting building code standards
Meet
and then
minimum
let people
separation
be
requirements.
creative.
Meet minimum separation requirements required by the building code.
Yep,
Okay.
Which you don't even need to say.
Well, I like to
Yeah.
say it because I'd like to alert
because
them to
they'll
that.
read this
yeah.
before they read the
Yeah.
building code.
If you just made it 5 feet, that would do that,
Yeah.
with maybe less words.
Yeah, well, I could say
Building
that's
code
what-
might change too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, I say building code just because if it does change, then we don't have to
Yep.
change.
Right.
So that's a good clarification. And then there's that administrative, and that was a cross-reference that Rick was mentioning earlier, essentially explaining what administrative approval means. Moving on to 10.81470, when section 10.440 requires a conditional use permit for attached or detached ADU, the planning board shall make the following findings. This is really just the findings. Some of the findings were duplicative of the standards, but we tried to, as we work through these findings, make sure that we've captured any opportunity for public input and also compliance with the standards, but without duplicating the standards. So that was some clarification we added. The ADU complies with the standards, there it is, that it's met all the standards above. And then most of these are essentially what was in place before. I think there's that principal dwelling unit again repeated. The ADU will not result, and this is moving on page 11, will not result in excessive noise, traffic, parking, or congestion. We have parking standards that are called out very specifically. We've actually cross-referenced and added reminding that you have to meet the minimum parking standards. The other things are really hard to measure, especially at the outset. So we have codes that really manage noise to a certain degree. Traffic, I think that we don't require a traffic study for these types of dwelling units, nor even for a single-family dwelling unit. So these are hard things to really, for a planning board to decide whether this is going to essentially tip the scale. And it's not a standard that we put other types of dwelling, which have a higher impact, a single-family dwelling unit, to the same test. So than an ADU. So we just eliminate that as something that's really a little too hard for them to make a decision at the outset. So, and then the other findings are essentially the same. So then we just jump into garden cottage, and then some corrections to the sections referenced. Thank you. And then similar to what we presented in the table, garden cottage shall not be, and I'm on page 12 now, shall not be larger than 600 square feet gross floor area. An accessory building that's proposed to be converted to dwelling unit that exceeds 600 square feet gross floor area, including the residential and non-residential uses. So there is that little capture piece saying if you're not going to, if it exceeds that, including if it's a garage and you want to say, hey, now it's a garden cottage, this part of it, this is going to essentially capture those, will be deemed a detached accessory dwelling unit and shall be reviewed by the code official or planning board as applicable. So this doesn't allow a conversion. You cannot add a 600 square foot unit within an existing 4-car garage and say this is now, we're going to count the whole structure. And then an existing accessory building shall not be expanded vertically or horizontally other than the additional front entry not to exceed 50 square feet or side rear deck not to exceed 300 square feet, except the planning board may grant a CUP. So this is that trigger if you would like to make that existing structure a little bigger, but you can never make it bigger than 600 square feet. That is really the cap. Otherwise, you're an accessory dwelling unit, a detached accessory dwelling unit. I think the reason we offer those clarifications is that there's been confusion about whether that was subject to modification, and now that's been cleared up for this one anyway. 10.815.401, section 10.440 indicates a garden cottage is allowed by right. Then there's that administrative clarification once again. And then when a conditional use permit is required, and then it's just the same standards that we applied before, there's really no, I'd say, substantive change to these standards that the planning board has previously looked at. And then in granting conditional use permit for a garden cottage, the planning board may modify a standard set forth in section 815.32 or 10.815.33, provide that the board finds the modification will be consistent with the required findings in section 10.815.40. Notwithstanding the above provision, the planning board may not allow a garden, I think it should say garden cottage, to exceed the 600 square foot. So there we're saying that although these other standards may be subject to modification by the planning board, this is not one of them. It has to go into a different category. That has actually been, we've stumbled on that one a little bit. What is subject to modification, what's not? And I believe there is, the last one is the, is it 10?
Page 16.
Yep, page 16. Rick, you going to take that one?
Sure, it's just another exemption, because we exempt single-family dwellings from the parking in the front yard, and we're just saying, you know, if the single-family dwelling had a garden cottage or accessory dwelling unit, it wouldn't lose that exemption, because that applies to a two-family dwelling also, so it's just making it consistent there. And then on page 18, just getting back to the, again, this is like the third or fourth time we're saying it, if it's larger than 600 square feet, it's a detached accessory dwelling unit.
In the definition.
Did you give any thought, this is a, and I'll shut up after this one. Did you give any thought to maybe simplifying it? I mean, it seems to me, do we need garden cottage? We really have attached, detached, and you get two kinds of detached probably, whether it's an existing building or a proposed building. Would it be simpler? My sense is it would be a lot less words to just not have a separate classification, because now you've got a type of garden cottage that isn't a garden cottage anymore. Now it's a detached. But if they're detached, they're detached, and if they're attached, they're attached.
Again, the idea behind garden cottages was to say, if you've got a very small building that you're not expanding, or under the revisions, if you're only expanding a little bit, that doesn't comply with the side yard setbacks, for example, the rear yard setbacks, so, you know, a shed or a garage. It complies with the setbacks for an accessory building, but not for a principal structure. It was just to allow those to happen. I'm sure we could do it a different way, but then you'd start getting into, when do you decide to allow a larger accessory dwelling unit to sit within the setbacks? And I guess that was just a concern.
I also think that it was a clearer distinction when we basically said you couldn't expand it, because it's basically saying this is already there, you can't expand it, but it's, you know, this recognizes a development pattern. But because we did get comments about, that's not, you know, some of these are not livable structures, they need a little more space, we opened that up a little. The distinction was clearer. If implemented as this is a, you cannot, if we had implemented faithfully and said you can never be more than 600, you're just dealing with whatever's there, you cannot change it. And that's, I think, kind of maybe was the original intent, but we've sort of let it slide a little bit, and we said you can't change it. You can add a deck or a front entrance, but you're not changing it. It's already there. We're going to recognize that it's there. We're going to allow you to convert it. When we open that up a little bit, the distinction is not as clear, because now we've basically allowed for an expansion, where before we were trying to recognize existing conditions. But I think it does also, within the way it's written, does recognize what is a unique development pattern that I haven't seen in any other jurisdiction I've worked in, where we do have a lot of detached garages, and we're trying to recognize that development pattern and create some sort of, I'd say, a mechanism forward for those that is minimal.
Yeah, I think you can still do all that, and it's not dependent on a label. That's my only point. I think instead of having 8 pages, you might be able to do it in 4 or 5. But just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, a potential remedy to that issue would be to have a detached accessory dwelling unit up to 600 square feet that doesn't comply potentially with any of the dimensional controls.
Just call it an
which is
existing
most of them.
building. Just call it an existing building. You've got,
Well, okay, yeah, but
know.
it has nonconformities,
Right.
which is the goal of why garden cottages are in there. Maybe there's a third category to detached in order to eliminate garden cottages.
Yeah, I could see that the idea of, it takes a little bit more rewriting, but you could take, which is fine with me.
He's getting paid
I
by
didn't
the,
think
he's
you'd
getting paid
object.
by the hour.
Thanks, Rick. No, I could see, as you say, an existing accessory structure does not have to comply with the side yard setback requirements.
Or any dimensional. I mean, right now, they're exempt. The garden cottages,
Right, yeah.
they're almost all non-conforming.
Right.
so if I'm a citizen coming to the town hall, I don't know anything about any of this. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an attorney, I don't know any of this stuff. And, Nick tells me I got a garden cottage. I'm going, I do. I've got a garage. I got a shed. Where's my garden cottage?
That's
It's
what you're
just, it's
asking
an
for.
educational
Yeah,
thing.
and actually, I think that would be much easier to do if you go to the subordination, define what an accessory structure is to begin with, to say, so that somebody can't build a four-car garage that extends into the setback and then convert it, then 2 years later come back and turn it into a DADU. But I think you're right. I think there's a solution that would make that simpler.
Dealing with an existing nonconformance and how
I
we
can,
would,
I
how
can
we
send
would
you, I
tackle
can
it.
send you a quick,
yeah.
bullet points you can play with and see what you think.
That'd be great.
But I guess that would be, that's a big change in the ordinance. So I guess if we
It's not it's a simplification. It's the same idea.
No, I agree.
It's
It's
the same
a
idea.
simplification. I agree.
It's just changing the categories where we've gone in and tweaked them, but I think the problem is that in the expansion, it does seem to look more like just a regular detached ADU that's of a smaller existing category and should be a subsection of that. I understand that. Definitely send what you want, and then we can follow up with with a couple of you and see.
Well,
what
I'm
you
not going to send it unless there's idea that people want to see it.
Send it.
I mean,
I would defer to I would defer if you.
I love anything to be more simplified,
Yeah.
so I think it's worth taking a look at.
Fair enough.
And at the same time, I think that to do this, if we're going to do that, I think it'd be good to look at the definition of accessory
Yeah.
dwelling, accessory structure.
This conversation has made me
Absolutely.
realize we do
Absolutely.
have to absolutely define that better, because I do think that becomes a really big problem. And honestly, it looks odd to have a tiny little cottage of a house and a giant three-car garage like that. We don't really want that in our city, I don't think. At least I hear you want the house to be the primary structure you're looking at.
It's changing the
right?
character, changing the character of a
Yeah.
It
neighborhood.
is, it does
Unless you
change
got
the
100
character.
acres and a
Right,
field
and then-
full of cows.
Then I don't care. If you want a giant barn behind your tiny cottage, I'll go for it. All right.
All right, we'll work on that a little bit more. And just bringing back to the questions as we round it out, is there any real concern about allowing those detached ADUs administratively the way they're proposed right now? I think there's a question also still on the table about the districts, whether we'd like to take a look at, as proposed, whether we'd like to open up all the districts, or maybe consider not opening all those districts up.
You need us to give you a decision between option 1 and option 2, right? For
Option 1 and
attached.
option 2, but then also, I think in both option 1 and option 2, we have essentially, detached only has one option, and I think, so there's one question about, do we feel comfortable with allowing, and I think it was G1, G2, there was a question raised about whether in detached, I'm sorry, in detached.
That's in detached.
I'm sorry, in detached, whether that should be attached, yes, we need an answer about
Option 1, option 2,
option
and
1
the
or option 2,
attached
yes.
accessory.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm in favor of option 2 myself, because I think it just spells it out slightly better. But that's just me. What does everyone else think?
I lean towards that.
Just speak into your microphones, people.
I lean towards that.
I heard what you said about the G1, G2, and I'm sitting here racking my brain as to why we'd want to encourage single-family homes in those two districts, and by extension, why would we want ADUs? Is it worth revisiting or not taking that on because it's not maybe before us in scope, but not having them in the G1 and G2 with an understanding we're going to go back and evaluate the table of uses in a subsequent review? for the G1 and G2, because it may not make
Are you
sense.
saying not change it now and take it up later
Make
as
them
part?
ends now, and with the understanding, we need to first go back and look at the G1, G2, understand it better, because I don't, even working here, understand it well enough to make an informed decision as to whether single-family should be there.
To take it off the table for
I'm
everything right
thinking
now?
of the projects we've all seen in those districts like Cinemagic, trying to imagine a single-family home, in that district, and it's not working. So that's just food for thought, rather than choose an option that keeps it in there, maybe choose one that takes it out, because we're not quite sure yet.
So we better understand
Yeah.
exactly, because I mean, and I remember when we were having the discussions around the G1 and the G2, it really boiled down to, we wanted sort of cluster neighborhoods, but would a cluster neighborhood be sort of the kind of neighborhood you want to have?
With the density
That density increase.
allowed in the G1, G2 as part of that zoning, it seems highly unlikely we'll ever get single-family homes, even if we wanted them.
So
right?
that would be, so if I'm understanding what you're saying, we would change, right now, accessory dwelling units, we allow by conditional use in G1 and G2. And rather than make them permitted, we'd make them no everywhere.
It's food for thought. but-
So it is, right now, for detached, it's a no, and we've moved it to a P, and for attached, it's a CUP. So it's just basically no across the board for those districts till we have a stronger is that what I'm hearing, for both?
I think it would be
For
safer
both
for now,
attached and detached, so just move that to,
until we have a better understanding of
Okay.
truly a single-family home in that district.
okay.
Actually, though, I just
Gotta throw a monkey wrench on
just
it.
realized, right, because state law requires us to allow them wherever we allow single-family dwellings.
Oh, so we have to, so
So
we should put them as a CU for the attached,
Yes.
and then detached can be no.
Yes.
Okay. We have to.
Okay, because then they're already there.
Right, they're already there because they have to be if we allow single-family use
Oh,
under the
because we
state
don't,
law.
because under state law, we don't have to
Yeah.
allow detached.
We don't in detached, but we do in the attached. So
Got it.
CUs on
That's a good solution.
on attached and no
So
on
it's
detached.
really, it's essentially the status quo.
Leave it the way it is.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the status quo, okay.
Back to your question, Beverly, speaking for myself, conceptually, I'm in favor of allowing more administrative approvals, but I think we need to get more of the details figured out. That's all.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're ready to say that today, but I'm certainly ready to say conceptually, sure.
What details, I mean, I know that we're talking still about trying to iron, but where do you feel like we need to beef it up a little bit more?
We talked about possibly having a tiered set of conditional use permit criteria. I think that ties right back into what's administrative and what's not. So in having that conversation, you'll decide that this doesn't even get us to that table of tiered uses. This is something that just comes to your desk. I just don't know that we've had that conversation yet.
And probably by extension, based on my notes, making sure we're all really clear and comfortable on the subordination standards, so staff can do that effectively without having problems.
Yeah,
Multiple
I mean,
interpretations.
the whole accessory building definition and subordination, I think we all, it's like, you know it when you see it, but we haven't written it yet.
So I do feel, I guess I'm trying to understand, because I don't want to overcomplicate it so that it's difficult for staff. I feel like the subordination standards are pretty close to what I would look for. I would understand how to implement those, and it seems to me that we would want those subordination standards to be across the board, whether it is or not. And then the other thing, the architectural standards, we may still need to refine those, because I think that those are pretty straightforward right now. I don't know if we need additional beef there to beef it up a little bit, but I would understand how to implement those. So I don't know that I want to introduce a lot of tiering that adds a lot of complication to the code, but if it is our intent that we are wanting to give, we don't want to allow them because we want more what before we will allow them by right. What is missing before we will allow those by right under a certain size? If they meet all subordination, all the architectural standards, they have met dimensional standards or sought dimensional relief, because we can't say you can't get a variance, then what is it that we want to see more happen before we will allow those by rights? The captain's size, their met all subordination requirements, which I think are I think that you can take a look at a plan set and understand if it's set back enough. You can take a look to see if the facade actually, based on the dimensions provided, I could implement those standards. The architectural standards, I think I could implement those based on the language that we've added. Look at the windows, look at the siding, look at the details, look at the pitch, things like that. These are things that I think are pretty basic. So if it met all those standards, what additional standards are needed in that permitted by right that are not there now if we were to? Because that's what I'm hearing, and that is an extra level of complication. I just don't, for that by right, I just don't know what we're missing there.
No, I'm certainly not suggesting complication. I'm suggesting simplification. And I think we're saying the same thing, just differently. I think I'm in agreement with you that all the things you said sound completely logical. And I think you probably could go upstairs and do it. But what if you don't? Let's say you go home and take another job tomorrow and somebody else is sitting up there. Maybe they're not fully cognizant of all the conversations you've had. It needs to be in writing. And we just talked about a number of changes today that could be small, could be a little bit larger than small. It's just details. So conceptually, I'm completely with you. And it may be that we're an hour away, we may be 20 minutes away, we may be a week away from having consensus. But I just think there needs to be some details worked out. That's all.
Okay. I think some of the details have been raised. I think and they're probably things I think we can work on. Yeah.
So Rick, going to the table of uses on page 2, the second for the detached accessory dwelling unit, let me see if this is really where your head is at. I'm thinking that if we were to kind of fold garden cottages into detached accessory dwelling units, we might be inserting another line above 1.221, which would be in up to 600 square feet in an existing accessory structure, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of-
Is that the kind of tiering you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that helps.
Okay, I thought you meant tiering of the standards. Yeah.
May not
Yeah.
I
comply.
did. I meant that as well.
You
but
meant
that's
tiering-
what-
But we can then
But-
put the standards for those in the text, but then we
Exactly.
have a new piece here.
Right.
Yeah, just,
right.
okay, got it. All right.
All right, so I think we've gone through all of your questions, have we?
Do we want to administratively approve attached ADUs, even the ones that result in expansion? I think, are you satisfied with the way the attached are laid out, allowing those? And the question I had before you is, for attached, we have CUPs if they're more than 700 square feet, but I think when you picked 1.212 and keeping it as a conditional use permit and not allowing any attached that are more than 700 square feet to be allowed by right. That was just a question. The impacts are lower. I think we just thought we'd pose it. We've opened the door there. We haven't opened it up all the way for attached, and are you comfortable just where it's at right now as sort of this is where we want to go from here? So I guess I'm asking, do you, is a CUP for greater than 750 square feet that meets all the performance standards, is that where we want it, or do we want it by right? And I think we're proposing as a conditional use. If you would like to open that up wider, you can.
For more than 750 square feet? No, I think we need to leave that as a conditional use.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
I don't
that's,
think that's,
That's why I like the way option 2 reads. Other than changing permitted to conditional use for the up to 700 square feet for Garden 1 and Gateway 1 and 2, I think all the rest work.
very good, okay. And elimination of bedroom, no one has any consternation about that, the bedroom
No.
requirements?
no.
No, we're good with that.
And then I think define subordination for all accessory structures. I think we did talk a lot about refining some of the language to make sure we understand what that means for ADUs. If we're not going to grab it through accessory structures, we are definitely going to say what we mean for ADUs.
Yeah, some of the notes that I took down is making sure we look at this and make sure that, as Corey pointed out, that we don't want to burden the smaller lots with the way the standards read, and accessory structures and the 75% subordination, really taking a look at truly accessories. I think we need to just go out and define that appropriately, and I think it's going to be worth the extra effort to do it.
Are you saying maybe to tackle it through the accessories, just to go in and define accessory structure? Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to sort of within the context of an ADU, this is how we're going to look at it? Or do you saying,
I say go out and really define accessory structures. I think we need to take a look at that. I think that will really then prevent us from having issues down the road with new accessory structures.
okay, understood.
Does everyone?
Yeah,
agree
I
with
just,
that?
I worry about, people
Right.
do some great big accessory whatever, wherever they want to do it, and then they come
Giant
back.
workshop that then they create
And
an
then they say, I
ADU.
want an ADU 2 years later, and well,
Well, I want to offer some clarification there, because I think we can close that gap within the context of the ADU regulations. Is the intent, what you're saying, is we want to close the gap for large accessory structures? It's an important distinction. It's because we can end that, and we're going to count the entire structure as part of, that all parts of that building will be counted. Your ADU cannot exceed the certain required building size. We can fix that here, but is the intent of what I'm hearing is do we want to say that all accessory structures need to meet some subordination standards? I want to make sure I understand.
It's the way I understand it, because,
I think you
We-
might want to differentiate between residential and non-residential districts.
yes, I would agree with that.
You would like to add that to the scope? Mhm.
Yeah, I think to residential districts, we need to add that to the scope, yeah.
So for residential districts, okay.
Everyone else
This
understand the way I
isn't
do.
a rural standard. Rural New Hampshire had a standard having big house, back house, little house, barn. This isn't rural New Hampshire, so.
Right, we don't have those, we don't have a lot of those. I say the rural districts do
We're not
whatever we
gonna have
want,
any
but
Right.
I think we defined in our smaller lot in certain districts, I think that we have a special understanding of accessory structures. Oh my God, I can't talk. Sorry, I didn't get enough sleep.
We knew what you meant.
All right. So we will add that to the scope and tackle it both ways. Mhm.
Thank you, thank you, thank you
There you go.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Are we done with our discussion? We are good? Because I know it's getting very late, sorry. It was a worthwhile discussion though, but I think we'll bring these back with those updates to our next land use meeting to do that. And now we will open it up to the public. Anyone in the room that'd like to come up and speak, just come speak at a microphone, please.
And thank you, Beverly and Rick.
Good morning, Elizabeth Bratter, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. This is excellent stuff. After having been to a lot of these meetings, it really is great. I do have some things I wanted to bring up, of course. When I look at 10.8.14.433, I have no clue what you're talking about. Just to let you know that from a regular person who's not in this stuff, that to me is very confusing. I'm not really sure what you want me to do. I just have notes everywhere. There is the biggest concern that,
Just tell, is that 10.8.14.433?
yes, on page 8.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah. So it talks about that it should be recessed at least 18 inches from the front wall of the principal, and then if it's an attached garage, it should be at least 10 feet back from the front wall. So if it's already an existing attached garage, you're not going to be able to move that back, is kind of what I'm thinking. But
This
that
is
AD?
only about construction of an attached garage.
Okay, all right, that's fine, all right. I just thought that was kind of confusing, so, for me. In regards to the automatically permitted ones, I don't have an issue with that as long as it requires part of that permitting, and you could put it in under 10.8.14.60, that that person has to provide abutter letters from however far out you think should be allowed to have comment. Because I'm thinking in the GRC neighborhood along McDonough Street, there are some garden cottages back there, and I think to myself, how would and they literally sit right next to or almost in the neighbor's yard. I mean, because you're sharing, the fence is the wall of the garden cottage. So if you put somebody to live in there as opposed to before you used it for your junk, or you may have sat in there put screening up and sat in there, that's different to have somebody in there living 24 hours a day. And the other piece of the pie that comes with that is if I move into a single family, like if I move into an area that's a single family home area, and now I have kids and I'm concerned, I know all my neighbors, so I feel quote unquote safe. We won't talk about what that means to me. But, and now you're going to have a rental unit in the back, which starts out for grandma and then becomes a rental unit. Now you have strangers coming in my neighborhood all the time. And therefore, I think it's really important that neighbors, it be explained to them somehow from the city, what does this mean? In other words, grandma can move in there now, and everybody's excited when grandma moves in, and you're helping out your family. But when grandma moves out and they have that empty space, that now can create income, and a lot of people need that income to be able to pay their taxes. Some people, as they get older, that's a way for them to do that. But neighbors need to understand that that's what an ADU means. It has the potential to become an income property. So that's just part of that, and I thought 1018-81460 would do that. So I already talked about that. So I know that code will do the standards of requirements for plumbing and stuff, and I know that architecturally, it's a great idea to move the structure away, but when you start to move structures away and you're going to add plumbing to it now, that really raises the expense a lot. So, you know, when you're moving that thing 10 feet away from the back of the building or whatever the different requirements are, you have to think about the fact that you're going to have to move this, you're going to have sewage back there and plumbing for sure, and those are big expenses to add to a structure. So just to think about the cost factor. I know that's,
We took
Right
the
now-
10 feet out.
Yeah, right now, we've moved it as close as we can move it.
yeah, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
that's something to
That's
think
very
about,
helpful,
because
yeah.
it's just another thing. When I think about larger garages, one way to control whether they're using that storage space as the second part of that unit or another bedroom would be to require a wall be put there, and they can't access those other parts of the building. So the accessory dwelling has to have a closed wall with no door that goes into the rest of the garage. So the garage has to have its own entrance, and it can't get in touch, it can't access the storage area or whatever they want to call it, the gym or whatever. So it's actually isolated. The fire department is going to want an egress window added to that, but to me, that would be one way to control the idea of, now I have a 4-car garage, and I'm going to put that accessory unit in one of them, and then I'm going to add 2 other bedrooms to that, because it's now going to be a 3-bedroom, which I'm not going to tell the city about, and we're going to have the 1 bathroom, so it's all set, because we're going to have connecting rooms. So that would be a way to do that. In section 10.814.522, you define what the facade means for an ADU. And I was just curious as to whether you want to just put that in the definitions or at the beginning or somewhere else, so that it's throughout the whole thing. That was what I was just thinking, to tidy up a little. And drainage issues were something that people brought up. And I don't see anything listed in the standards for planning. I'm sure that comes into code, but I think as people begin into this, they need to understand that drainage is going to be something they're going to need to look at. So you talked about that. You want to mention some things about the code and the 5 feet. It might be helpful to include the concept of drainage so that they know that. So those are my, and the G1 clusters. There's a development in Dover, which in the middle has, on the bottom, it has all the commercial stuff, and then above it, it has apartments. Then the next, it kind of goes out. So then the next section is condos, 2 or 3 unit condos. And then the next section out is single-family homes. So you can create those in those G1 type, I think they call it something else there, but it's under that kind of G1 thing. So you can create single-family homes. If the developer is graceful about it, you can create them further out. So it is something that you're going to have to consider no matter what. That's mine. Thank you.
If I could just address one comment about the
Sure.
drainage, I would recognize that's starting to come up more and more, even with an addition of 1 single family. Code doesn't require that we submit that for drainage review. I have talked to the chief building official, and he said that he's starting to look at those. And I think we're starting to see more stipulations coming out of the planning board saying, we'd like to go ahead and have you do some drainage calculations to be reviewed. I think that it's something that it's not just about ADUs, it's about any time we subdivide, and it's a real issue. I appreciate you bringing it up. It continues to show up. I don't know that we found a silver bullet for dealing with that for single-family homes, but it's definitely something we're trying to figure out without creating a big review burden for Public Works, but trying to figure out this issue about drainage for small additions, because the patterns are changing. I think that we're having more frequent events. I think stormwater management is becoming important for even small additions. I appreciate that concern.
Well, the other thing, too, is that if you get actual letters from the abutters who have drainage issues with their neighbors are going to put that on their list, likely. I mean, if they don't, well, that's a problem.
We already have a problem. This is going to make it worse, kind of.
Right,
letters.
that kind of stuff. And I've noticed that at many meetings I've gone to, the people who have water issues tend to show up.
Yep.
And be very loud.
Yes, they
You know
do.
what I mean? So, and I get that, because I have one of my properties has that issue, and it's been an ongoing problem because nobody is in charge of the water.
I think
once
that's-
it gets made, then you're stuck with it.
I think
All
that's
right.
valid. Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, we have one more person in the room, and then we'll get to you.
Okay, sorry, thanks.
Peter Huda, 288 South Street. So, in following you here, I'm speaking to you as a resident that could possibly have an ADU or DDU, and also an abutter to someone. And my biggest concern, and I'm going to tie this in with the questions you had at the bottom of the page here. The biggest question I have here is how are you going to get the abutters notified? If you go directly, and maybe I don't understand this correctly, but if you go directly through an administrative approval without going through the planning board and having public input, how would I, as an abutter, have any idea that this has come through until somebody starts digging in their backyard? So that's a big concern here for me. The other concern is that as you go through this and put it through the planning board, there's a certain process that people are definitely aware of. So I would ask, from my perspective, that everything, whether it's administrative or not, just like the HDC, also just runs through a meeting, and the public is advised. And second set of eyes, being the planning board, looks at this, and the public has basically 2 chances to have input on this. Also, I have a question on 10814-32. It's great that you put here that this, you will have to comply with being the principal place of residence. It is not said how the city is going to enforce that, or when they are going to force that. Are you going to look at that every year? Is there some kind of compliance that is going to be required here that, as was previously said, you could have grandma move out and somebody move in. If somebody else still is going to live there, how are you going to verify that? Are you going to look at the deeds? Are you going to look at records? I think it should be said up front that this will be followed and needs to be complied with. The other thing that I do have a problem with, I went to the back and I'm looking at the parking here. So I guess I need to know who has 0.5 of a car. Logically, to me, this doesn't make any sense. If you're going to have any type of accessory dwelling, whether it's attached or detached, the goal here is to have a person in there. 500 feet, it's probably one person, one car. So to require 0.5 of a parking space, especially when you're getting down into our neighborhoods here anywhere, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Even 500 feet, 500, 700, you could have 2 people there, especially in today's families and stuff like that. You definitely probably go up here. So I would ask you to look at this, especially when you're going down into neighborhoods and residential areas. This also affects all of the abutters and basically anybody around the area. Especially if there's small commercial facilities around. I speak from experience here. And those would be some of the comments I have so far. I would support making this more simple, and I really like the suggestion that was made to just define it between accessory and. So those would be my comments. My main concern is abutters and not just having someone look out their window and see a bulldozer in the back, and things have moved forward and they haven't had a chance to say anything. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and I believe we have one person, at least two hands on the line. So if we could bring forward Mike, his hand was up first. Nope, it's going to be done by somebody else.
Thank you. It's a little bit hard to follow along on so if I missed this, my apologies, but one suggestion or request I have is that you would consider, in the case of an attached ADU where, it's my understanding that you need to have almost like a breezeway, some sort of conditioned space between the ADU and the primary house. So let's say someone's building a 600 square foot ADU and it's being connected by a little 8-foot long breezeway. In terms of the lot coverage, I would ask that you consider having, so instead of say, the 600 square feet plus that little, let's say 48 square feet breezeway, all that empty space on either side of the breezeway be counted as well, because as an abutter, it's not just going 20 feet off the back of that property, it's going 28 feet off in terms of, your views and just general space and, neighborhood character and things like that. In most cases, it probably wouldn't make a difference. You're not talking about much area, but it could. To me, it merits consideration because it's not so much just the size of the actual ADU, it's how far out it's going into the property. And as you all know, in Portsmouth, for most of us, we don't have much in terms of views and being able to see a ways, so anytime that's being cut into, I think we want to try to minimize that.
Mike, could you please give us your full name and address for the record?
Sure. It's Michael McNeely, and I'm at 205 Wyburn Street.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, McNeilly.
All right, and if you have nothing else, we will bring Liza forward.
Yep, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you ready for me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about this. I'm driving back from the Cape. Well, I'm not driving, thank goodness, but somebody else is driving. So we're over on the side of the road so I can kind of say my thing. And I apologize if I'm repeating what's already been said. It was a little hard to hear you all this morning, so I'll do my best. So my first question...
Please, just give us your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Liza Hewitt, 726 Middle Road. The first question I have is kind of a general question. I know that in this second phase 2, this is only one part of phase 2, and the other part involved assisted living and senior housing. Is that going to be addressed in this phase before it goes on any further to wherever it goes next, or is that not being discussed anymore, and why was that taken off the table? That's one of my questions. So now as I moved into the ADU, and again, if I'm repeating anything that you've already addressed, I apologize. I'll go back and watch the film again. I'm questioning about the definition of facade, and I'm just wondering if the facade is just the floor that the ADU resides on. So if there's a 3-story building, garage on the first floor, 2 stories above it, are you counting the facade as just the second floor where the ADU actually is residing, or are you counting it as the facade of those 3 stories? And I would really like you to be more clear about that in the ordinance. My second question is about the AADU. I seem to read it that the building height of the addition of the AADU shall be, quote, less than the building height of existing dwelling unit. And I just wonder whether this is the best way to phrase that, as you seem to have gotten into some trouble with the DADU and the building height being less than, and I know you've fixed that now, so I'm wondering whether you should look at fixing it for AADU as well. I'm also wondering why you're reducing the separation of DADU and the principal dwelling from 20 to 10 feet, and I'm assuming that's because you're trying to put them on smaller lots, and therefore you need less space between them, but that was just a question. It sounds as if all this administrative approval of these, I know, I heard Bev say earlier that the building, not inspector, but I forget his name, is going to be doing a lot of looking at this, but it's going to put a lot on the planning department, and I just hope you all are prepared for that. In 10.814.74, the ADU will maintain compatible relationship to adjacent properties and, quote, will not significantly reduce the privacy of adjacent properties. I'm just wondering how you're going to judge that, because that seems pretty subjective to me. I'm guessing that abutters are going to say it's impacting our privacy, and I'm just wondering how you're going to qualify that and look at that objectively, and who will be looking at that.
It's this one here.
Another thing was in the neighborhood group forum. One of the women in that forum was very concerned about drainage and runoff. I haven't had any experience with it, but I don't see that mentioned anywhere in this document, and I'm just wondering whether that needs to be addressed, as it was a concern for one of the neighborhood reps. Let me see. I'm wondering also, and I have a question about this, maybe somebody can get back to me, what a home occupation use is as it's described for a principal, the principal unit of the ADU or the ADU shall be used for business except that the property owner may have a, quote, occupational use. And I think that that's already in there, but I don't understand what that means.
I'm sure we have a definition of that.
Parking. It seems to me, and I may be totally wrong about this, that the current ordinance says 2 parking spaces per ADU unit. I may be wrong, but that's what I remembered reading at one point. Parking was identified on the survey by the abutters as a chief concern. I think that was top on the list, actually. So now you've taken away the maximum number of bedrooms. So if you granted a CUP for, let's say, 1,000 square feet, you could conceivably have 3 bedrooms in 1,000 square feet, and you're only required to have 1.3 parking spots for those 3 bedrooms. And I understand, I read in there that it's rounded up to 2, or the nearest next number. I wonder why you don't just say 2, because 1.3 is always going to have to be rounded up to 2, so just say 2. And what that does for parking, if they only need 2 spots and you've got 3 bedrooms, that's a concern, and maybe that's addressed in there and I'm just not reading it right. So I don't necessarily agree with the eliminating of the number of bedrooms, because I think that parking needs to be taken into consideration. You seem to think well, members of the committee seem to qualify it as not that big a deal to take that out. But I think for abutters and for the neighborhood, it's going to add more people, more need for parking, more noise, potentially, maybe. So I'm not sure that I agree with that being taken out. And let's see. And then I just want to finish up by telling you the things that I find very good about your new ordinance, just as positive. I really like the better definition of architecturally consistent. Thank you, Nick, because I'm sure you had a hand in that. I like the way that's defined and that there are examples given. I think that's important. I like the fact that the building height, footprint, and volume of the DADU shall be no greater than 75%, although it sounds like through your discussion that maybe there's some clarification that needs to be made because people may have different ideas of what that means. And I like keeping the yearly renewal schedule to renew for a DADU, that you have to keep applying. I think that's important because I know that you had a discussion previously about whether or not that was necessary. And I also really, really like the fact that you've basically removed the term clearly subordinate from that ordinance anywhere and have qualified it. So I thank you very much for all your work. It's obvious you've done a lot of work. I'm hoping that this will remain in this committee for at least another month so that we can see what changes have come from the comments that have been made, and that we can further have some time to look at that. So thank you for all your work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Liza.
Thanks,
And
Liza.
Thank you.
If we have no more hands online or inside, so yeah, it was my intention that we would bring back hopefully a clearer view at our next meeting, and go team. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.